So guys, this is a person named Quazii that I have seen in my reaction feed for several days now, but due to the number of WoW creators coming over, I have not had a chance to click everything that appears from all subjects across YouTube. It's just too much content. And so chat said, hey, you got to see this one. You've got to see what Final Fantasy XIV's A Realm Reborn reminds this particular WoW veteran about what MMORPGs should be. So I look forward to jumping in and finding out.
Finish A Realm Reborn for the first time in 2021. And yes, for those who know me, I'm a WoW refugee who came to check out Final Fantasy XIV recently with the intention of finding something to kill time while I wait for World of Warcraft to release its much delayed 9.1 content patch. As a 10-year-old WoW veteran, I never imagined I would be purchasing the full game after just 2 hours of free trial gameplay. And let's just say I've never looked back since then. From the moment I walked around Ul'dah as my little Lalafell, whom my community has now affectionately dubbed Potato-chan or Falafel-chan, I was hooked. Since then, I've gone on to do 10 episodes featuring the highlights of my adventures through this brand new world of Eorzea, at least sinking in close to 40 hours within the span of my first week. And if you'd like to check those out, I have a playlist to the top right here. This game has truly revived my childlike sense of wonder and exploration, a feeling I've not experienced for almost a decade now. I tried.
Some of that feeling of newness is just a valid contrast. In our life, there are times where we want the comfort of something known and the times that we want the discomfort of something new. And so when you play a game for 10 or 15 years, it's not entirely that game's fault that you don't feel new anymore, right? World of Warcraft, in my opinion, from expansion to expansion, sometimes changes too much. And so I think that some of what's being attributed to Final Fantasy, while I love that they love the game, would also just be true if they just played new games from time to time. If they'd never played a Diablo game ever, they could stay within the Blizzard family and have a new and different experience. And assuming ARPGs appeal to them, going back and playing Diablo 2 for the first time, going and playing even Diablo 3 for the first time, which I don't feel is as good as Diablo 2, is going to be this new and fun experience and feel immersive as they're just, oh my gosh, what's next? Oh my gosh, they expanded the loot system. I've never seen that before. Wow, look at this different type of boss encounter. And so I think some of what the WoW veterans coming to 14 are experiencing is love of what Final Fantasy does well. But some of it, and the reason that some of the things they're saying are things that don't necessarily get repeated by veterans that regularly are asked, is this game worth it? Should I hop in right now? As they talk positively about what the game is doing currently, what it's done, where it's come from, and where it's headed. Some of those things don't get listed because they're not actually unique to 14. And as a veteran player, they do fall off because they're unique to something that's a new experience. Something that's exciting because it's different.
To ask myself why. Why is it that this game was able to elicit a response of wow, what a game, at the end of the credits of A Realm Reborn when I finished my first playthrough? And I find it really hard to pinpoint exactly why, but I will attempt to tell you what the game did differently versus traditional MMOs that I've played in the past, majority of which is World of Warcraft, and I'll attempt to explain how is it that Final Fantasy XIV have truly sucked me into this world, while at the same time leaving me feeling liberated that I can play Final Fantasy XIV in any shape or form I like and still enjoy it. Firstly, my impressions before trying out Final Fantasy XIV The Realm Reborn is that, oh, it's an MMORPG. It should have the same formula as other MMOs I've played before, just that this franchise, the looks, the visuals, the themes are painted Final Fantasy. But how wrong was I? Final Fantasy XIV is actually, in my opinion, a single-player RPG first.
I think the reason that last point gets hit on by a lot of WoW players is that WoW did a great job early on in its history establishing that you could be a WoW player and didn't have to be a fan of MMORPGs or even a gamer. You could literally just be a WoW player. There are WoW players that don't consider themselves good examples of gamers. They don't really know what goes on with companies like Nintendo or Sega or Square Enix or even the rest of Activision. They don't really consider themselves big fans of things like E3 or PAX or any of the, or going out to YouTube and watching all sorts of gaming content. they play World of Warcraft. And so a lot of what people expect is because a lot of the marketing is put around terms like WoW clones and WoW killers. But even if you carbon copy something over from World of Warcraft into another game, if that other game is doing something at all unique, any one quality unique, it's going to ripple out and it's going to cause everything else to be slightly different. When you look at even dungeon design, both games put a series of bosses and a series of trash in order, and they drop loot that helps you gear, but once you get into raids is no longer relevant. Both games do this before you toss in things like M+, which is a different layer on top. Both games carry that through. Both games tie those stories back to the world and the narrative at large. They have unique boss encounters that might be referenced somewhere else. They have things that reflect the zone that they're from. They do very similar things, but because of the combat systems, 4-man versus 5, because of the way healing works in both games, because of the way we translate mechanics, because of the lack of a DBM and the way that we've learned to develop these mechanics, because of the order in which we focus on things. What's the most important between story and challenging content and immersive world design? What order do those go in? Does story always go at the top? Does story just kind of fill in where it makes sense? Do we design the boss and add the story, or design the story and add the boss? Even when you just talk about this, they're going to feel different. And I think a lot of WoW players aren't used to that because they say, as an MMO player, but then when they list their MMO experience, it's just WoW. They didn't play Guild Wars 1 or Destiny 1 or EVE Online or ESO, or now Guild Wars 2 and Destiny 2. They've never tried some of the failed ones over the years, like WildStar. They've never gone and leaned into these. They don't plan on going ever into BDO or Warframe or some of the new ones as we talk about New Genesis coming online, New World coming online. They won't touch any of those, and so they're not used to separating what makes WoW unique from the genre from what is typical in a genre. To catch a pattern, you need a couple points of data so that you can say, what is WoW really doing that sets WoW apart, and what is actually something that's just defined by the genre it sits in.
First, and an MMO second. The key difference is Square Enix has spent so much time ensuring that you as a player, even if you're exploring the world alone, have so much to see, so much to experience. The main story quests are moving and captivating, and it leaves you feeling so much for your own character and the people around it. It invests time into the cutscenes, into the cinematics, into the mobs, into the zones. Every turn of the way, there's something new to see, something new to interact with. Even things like everyday mobs, Square Enix has painstakingly added so much personality to them. I was creeping up to a sleeping cactus mob in the middle of the night, and it ran away startled, which gave me a mini jump scare. I found a place within the game, which was a mini beach resort in Costa del Sol, which reminds me so much about the holiday I had in the Maldives before COVID. The city of Limsa Lominsa reminded me of Greece and Santorini. The weather, day and night cycle is even integrated into the cutscenes, meaning the single player cutscenes would render based on whether it's currently day or night, rain or shine in the game. These are not pre-rendered cutscenes. This is to the extent to which Square Enix wants you to feel totally immersed in the game as a single player. Speaking about the weather system, I don't even know where to start. It adds another depth to video games that I've never experienced before. When there's a thunderstorm...
So one of the unfortunate things about somebody coming to A Realm Reborn versus WoW is they're comparing, usually, Shadowlands, which has had things removed and added over 8 previous games, to A Realm Reborn, the opening thing. And so it's a little like comparing Shadowbringers to vanilla WoW Classic. It's not... He's talking about the weather, and all I can think is, like, you love this game so much for the weather, and all we have done since A Realm Reborn is pull back from integration with weather. All we've done since A Realm Reborn is get away from spending a bunch of time exploring cities. I use the Crystarium to go to the Crystalline Mean and to pop in maybe to visit an auction board. Actually, I still spend a substantial amount of time in Limsa. So he talks about Limsa being great. Well, I hope you really like it, because you're still going to go back to places like Limsa. You still use these core hubs. So it's interesting because I don't know if you've ever put your foot in a mouth at a party where maybe there's 5 dishes out on the platter, and the host comes over, and you say, "Well, I really appreciate it." And they go, "Oh, well, I noticed you really only tried the dip. Did you try the other 3 things?" "Well, the other 3 things weren't very good, but man, you really nailed it on that dip." And they go, "Oh, well, I spent all day making the other three things, and Bob brought the dip." And you're just like, I just insulted all of the work that the host put on in the party. So there's moments here where he's like, you know what a Realm Reborn does well? All these things that are not in Shadowlands or not in Shadowbringers. Like, weather is still a thing visually. It still affects the cutscenes and all that. But our sightseeing log used to be based around weather. Gathering and stuff used to be... the unspoiled node system used to be much deeper and more complex now, and for the sake of quality of life has been simplified. A number of things in the game that he is talking about, the depth that is added, was things that players at the time actually complained about once they settled into them, and we've pulled back from.
You literally see flashes of lightning change the way the zone is lit up. You hear the rain pelting against the ground, and when you step into the inn or tavern and you hear that warm, inviting music and see the warm glow of the fire, you feel safe and sound. And I've spent countless minutes just hanging around enjoying the music and reading the flavor text from all the NPCs.
Which was true if we're going to compare this to the game it was trying to emulate. ARR was learning a lot from the existing MMOs of the time, namely World of Warcraft. And so, as a World of Warcraft player, the first time you step into Stormwind or Orgrimmar, the first time a quest carries you across the zone from Durotar into the Barrens, and the Barrens goes on forever, and you have to run to Crossroads, and it's this long run, and there's a lion sitting off to the right that might kill you, and you're like, oh no, and you have to kind of scroll out to the side, and you notice in the distance what renders is some different monsters. You see monsters with personalities like harpies and murlocs that you grow to hate because of their very core mechanics. There are moments in the World of Warcraft early on in its expansions where the world was its core. Not until Cataclysm, when we rebuilt the world, did we see that progression moving to, let's get you through this and into Endgame. There was a huge emphasis on the open world early on. So what he's comparing here is not really a fair comparison of Shadowlands to A Realm Reborn. It's a much more apt comparison if he goes back in time to the first time in the Burning Crusade when they recreated it as you set foot in Nagrand and those floating islands were there, and it changed when you unlocked flying and you could easily pop out to areas to go mining, or you could fly over Hellfire and you could avoid that thorny mess as you flew out to do dungeons. There are these moments in World of Warcraft that were amazing and immense, and Shadowlands doesn't feel that way. But Shadowbringers, while it feels beautiful the first time you step into zones, while Raktika was my favorite zone going through the leveling experience, Raktika Forest is not something that I really spend a lot of time going back to. The final zone, the Tempest, of this expansion, is something that I feel is underutilized. It was so meaningful to me as somebody invested in the story arc. As I went through it and as I experienced our introduction from area to area within the zone, I really don't have a reason to go back. I was excited when leveling up my relic fishing rod that I had a reason to go back there and fish up one of the fish for it, because I don't really use that zone anymore. And so I think what he's talking about here is actually not necessarily a good representation of A Realm Reborn versus Shadowlands. I think what he's talking about is something that, as games have added quality of life, as games have made it easier to teleport around and respect your time by not spending a bunch of time traveling just arbitrarily across a continent only to realize you forgot to get the quest item from the town and have to run all the way back, or you have to go back and repair, or you die and have to get back from your body, whatever mechanic the game uses to handle that. It's that sense of grandness, as we've added quality of life, has been lost. It has made the game way more respectful of time. It's easier to find groups. It's easier to get to the content you want. But what he's describing here that A Realm Reborn does well is a sense of grandness. Now, the emphasis on story is unique to ARR over vanilla. But that sense of wonder that you get in a new and large sense of being, a sense of the world, a sense of place, as Asmund says here, Asmund Ishtar in chat, it's not actually, like, I would love to take credit for it, but as the 14 player reacting to this, but I actually think he might be jumping the gun. I think that it's not something 14 did unique. It's something that has faded in the last 5 to 10 years in games.
This is a game that values the single-player experience within an MMO. And this is what truly draws you into the game, into the world of Eorzea, and makes you develop an attachment for this living, breathing.
Values the single-player experience is an incredibly kind way of mentioning that when you level in an MMO in 2021, you're going to be leveling solo. In pretty much any game, nobody's going to be there to help you unless they have to be.
And growing WoW. Growing because it is my understanding that Square Enix has a solid roadmap for always adding new features into the game, and they've delivered upon that regularly. The second big thing that comes to mind when I think about Final Fantasy XIV is the concept of freedom. The world of Eorzea to me is a playground where anyone and everyone can explore how they like to enjoy this game in their own shape or form without being judged and having no pressure or commitments to do things at a certain pace. As someone who plays a lot of World of Warcraft endgame, including Mythic raiding and pushing Mythic Plus keystones, one of the biggest things that I need to do is to keep up with my character progression. I have to do daily quests, weekly raids and dungeons in order for my characters to keep up with the average power level so I don't get left behind. And this sometimes means doing things that I don't enjoy in order to do content that I really enjoy. For example, grinding the same daily quest again and again in a depressing place called the Maw, just so I can enjoy the few hours of endgame PvE content in a week. In Final Fantasy XIV, based on my own experience and everyone I spoke to, everyone enjoys the game at their own pace. Whether you are a hardcore raider, whether you are just a casual player, you get to dictate the pace of your progression. Moving on, there are just so many.
So he made 2 points there, and they are different points. He made them as one cohesive thing because they overlap in his life, but they are 2 different points. The first is, as an endgame raider, World of Warcraft has a much larger list of mandatory weekly and daily activities that go well beyond raiding than Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy's systems are a lot more freestanding. If you wanted to keep up in Ishgard Restoration, that had nothing to do with keeping up with Mythic. So those are 2 completely different ways of handling in-game progression, and so from his point of view as a Mythic raider coming over, he will, once he does get out of A Realm Reborn, he's not ready to actually compare that because he's not doing in-game progression over here, but once he is caught up, I do think that he's actually ahead of the curve here in mentioning something that will likely turn out to be true for him. Staying up on Savage progression does leave a lot of flex in what you do with the rest of your time, but the beginning of his point, talking about all these other things you get to, when he's not talking about the word mandatory being present, a lot of times one game looks to the other game and they look to what they see on stream or what they hear about people spending a big bulk of time doing, and they assume that's all the game is. And so people say World of Warcraft is just jumping around in Orgrimmar on a mount and grinding dailies before you get into your Mythic Plus and raiding. That's all it is. That's all World of Warcraft players do, unless they're PvPers, and then they're the most toxic people ever. And that's an entire, as a monolith, description of all of World of Warcraft. Meanwhile, World of Warcraft says all Final Fantasy players do is jump around on their catgirls in Limsa, and they just weeb out over the story, and they just sit there and talk about story and replay story, and then they just dress up in their glamour and ERP. Are these things present in both communities? Absolutely. Stereotypes are often based in at least a fraction of truth, right? Through a single anecdotal portion of vision. But they are not. The reason stereotypes are a problem is because they're not an all-inclusive, well-thought-out view of having any level of empathy or knowledge over a wide range of the subject, ever. And so when you talk about both games, they say, well, in my game, there's all this stuff to do when I'm not doing the stuff that is the mainline content. And in your game, there's just the mainline content. That is not true either direction. So when people say, well, what is there to do in WoW? It's mostly raiding and Mythic Plus. Okay, but if you don't do either of those things, could you spend 80 hours a week in the game? Yeah. You could be leveling alts. You could be transmog farming. You could be mount farming. You could be going and doing the pet battle system, which is like Triple Triad, this large Pokemon-based open world trainer thing. You level them up to 25. There's different ways to do that. You could be going and doing Dark Moon Fair or rotating events such as time walking, seasonal events, and all of this, which have big, deep loop systems to encourage you to dive into those. You can literally shoot your character out of a cannon to try to land in a ring. You could be going off and exploring the fact that they have two different storylines, Alliance and Horde. So if you want to get immersed into the world lore, there's actually, through especially BFA, there was a reason to level a character on both sides if that's your form of progression. The PvP system is vast compared to Final Fantasies, and so you could easily jump into PvP as a full-time focus. You could jump in and you could do as many things as you wanted to do in World of Warcraft and never even zone in to Shadowlands. You don't have to ever pass through Arbos to be interested in going and trying to get all the crafting recipes from past expansions. You don't have to ever set foot in the Maw or Arbos or Mythic Plus. Your character doesn't even have to reach level 60 to have access to an unlimited number of hours as a new player. Go and watch Qyne's stream, Quyne, I think, on Twitch. He is trying to get everything from the game, everything, across everything. He's tracking it through an add-on called All the Things, and it's an unbelievably diverse amount of content. Huh. Wow, that really sounds like an advantage over Final Fantasy XIV. Except that Final Fantasy XIV, when you're not doing these things, has Extreme and Savage Rage. You can go do old ones on minimum item level. You could go do the old ultimates, which are never scaled down. It does have a PvP system that during certain seasonal events and resets of PvP seasons, because they do also have an invitational, does get a decent impact, especially during prime hours. Yes, it's not a core focus of the game, but it's there. We have an entire Golden Saucer casino full of minigames where you can race chocobos or do a MOBA with your minions or play a card game that does have trainers out in the world. We have everything from deep crafting and gathering systems. They got to rebuild their own system. There's relic grinds of old and current. There's 4 separate relics for your battle classes. There's also now Skysteel tools as relic systems for your crafters and gatherers. There's the ability to build your own house and be involved in those communities. There's huge amounts of cosmetics in both games. There's a number of mounts you could farm. You could go grind old beast tribes, which is a form of content that exists in both games. Both of these games, if you never bought the current expansion while it was current, you only bought it on a sale once it was late in the expansion, and you never zoned into it, you kept your character 10 levels under cap at all times, have an unlimited number of hours for an average player. Thousands and thousands of hours in past achievements and experiences to try. They are both mountains of content. What is different when you're established in one and you go to the other is that in your one, you've already looked at all 100 buckets and you've already said, I don't like these 75 buckets. And of these 25, I've already consumed it to the point where they feel repetitive. And when you go into the other one, you don't even know what all 100 buckets are. And so you look out and it's this vast amount of things to try for the first time. Forgetting that in your game, there was a moment when you first tried a pet battle system. There was a moment when you first tried doing mini games or tried old raids or tried messing around with your cosmetic system or tried going into PvP. There was those moments. And those were fun then, and they simply aren't now. And so you're giving points to one game for having something you haven't done, and you're not counting points to this game simply because you have done them.
Things to do, and I'm not even at the end game yet. I only finished a Realm Reborn. And each of the things I'm about to mention can be its very own end game content. You are not funneled into just doing PvE raids or dungeons. You get to truly
No. You're never funneled into doing just PvE dungeons and raids. You have chosen. The reason I quit World of Warcraft was because I felt that I was funneled into one way to play. And I quit the game, and half of the game was because of changes they made, and half of the game was because of requirements I put on myself. And when I came back to the game without those requirements, there was an entirely different World of Warcraft waiting for me, even in the expansions that I played when they were live.
Express and enjoy the game in a manner that suits you. Through glamour farming, through gambling in a casino, through crafting, through gathering, through player housing, through collecting minions, farming rare weapons, collecting mounts, and I swear I saw this so many times in the game, literally sitting down on the ground and listen to someone else play a musical instrument, or just interacting with the minions and the pets and the people around you in the city.
Everything you just described has a rough equivalent in both games.
Bottom line is you get to choose. You get to choose how you spend your time, and even if you want to take a break away from Final Fantasy XIV and come back, you won't feel like you're incapable of continuing with progression in the game just because you are now behind in terms of character power levels because you did not do your dailies or your weeklies. The concept of freedom though is...
This is true in both games if you are not somebody on the end of mythic progression. The unfortunate thing is that because they put so much mandatory requirement behind doing the end game progression, the true final when it is current, and that they put an achievement called ahead of the curve in the game to really reward you for doing that and make you feel that you should do it, that if you make ahead of the curve your primary driver of content, it takes up so much of your time that it's frustrating that you're letting one thing take 10 or 15 or 20 all the way. You don't ever have to be current. I am not current in World of Warcraft right now. I am subscribed. It is fine. I played all the way through BFA, ignoring Zandalar except on patch day. I really just went back and did other stuff. You do not have to be current. It is a choice. But the community and the way the game is drived does make that choice feel like it's the forefront. And so you have to be okay with not playing the thing that looks like it's in the headlines. It's exactly the same as in Final Fantasy, not being story-based. There is a huge non-vocal portion of this community that does not play this game for story. But you have to be okay with constantly seeing coverage that you're doing it wrong. Just know that it's okay. There is plenty to enjoy here. So if you do not want to be a mythic and M+ hardcore raider, you're playing World of Warcraft just fine. And the game is constantly adding content for you. And Ian is constantly saying in interviews that he is aware of the analytics that show that there is a huge portion of the game that pay their subscription every single month to play that game for something other than what you see as the top 100 results on something like Twitch or YouTube.
Truly characterized by its job system. In World of Warcraft, and my viewers will know this, I want to play all 6 tank specs. And that meant I had to level 6 different characters to max level, each going through the excruciating leveling experience that I swear I can already memorize the quest tags, where to go next, and the objectives by the 3rd time I play through the very same old content. What is the purpose of that? Spending 80% of the time doing something I dislike so I can enjoy 20% of my game time makes no sense to me, having experienced Final Fantasy XIV. Now, I get that traditional MMORPGs are meant to be grindy, but the fact that Square Enix has taken a look at this notion and challenged it and brought their own spin to the table truly impresses me. It was a brave and bold decision, and it paid off. In Final Fantasy XIV,
and this is where the fact that he's talking about A Realm Reborn in 2021 does not accurately represent it. He is saying that it is a bold and brave choice to not have a grind in content that they have sped up. He does not remember that we were doing fate trains, grinding the old fates over and over and over to level up alt jobs that we didn't want to play to get access to cross-class skills on our main characters. He was not there when we were having dungeon roulettes be a huge portion of our weekly tome cap grind, whether or not you ever wanted to see that dungeon again. He is not aware of the fact that leveling roulette and MSQ roulette are a great way for an average person to level up alternate things, and that we have seen Castrum and Praetorium, 2 things that he is showing cutscenes from throughout this, over and over and over, and those cutscenes are non-skippable because the community couldn't be respectful about them being skippable, and now has to be baited with huge amounts of experience to watch something that is a meme in the community. He is simply talking about his joy of ARR as it has been shaped to be the best of what ARR can be for a new player, limited by the tools and resources available to Square Enix. He is not talking about A Realm Reborn as it was then, or Shadowbringers as it is now. So I am thrilled that he likes the game. I think it's wonderful. It's a sign that Square Enix's changes to A Realm Reborn, where they pruned 100 MSQ quests from it, is giving a good experience. I'm thrilled to hear that. But to say that this is an all-inclusive thing about what MMORPGs should be about, this is not even what Final Fantasy XIV is or was about. This is what his experience now versus his experience that he has chosen to define within World of Warcraft is about. And when I went back to World of Warcraft, I took the mentality that I discovered in Final Fantasy back with me and had a great time. If I played Final Fantasy the way I played WoW back then, I would quit just like I quit in Pandaria. I let it rule my life. I got home from school or work and I felt like I had to play several hours through content that I had to do to be optimal before I was allowed to get to the parts of that game or any other game that I enjoyed. I let it become a part-time job that I was paying them $15 a month for, and that's why I quit. You don't have to do that. But I centered myself in a guild where I felt I was going to have to isolate myself from friends and what they were doing because I suddenly didn't feel the way they did about endgame. I felt like I was going to have to quit the game to quit the game. And I could have simply transferred to another server, found another guild, and started over. I simply could have said, hey guys, I want to step back from raiding. They wouldn't have kicked me. I simply could have played the game differently, and I would have never had to leave World of Warcraft. There was a lot of things to enjoy. I wanted less of a raiding-centric thing. Garrisons, as much as they're a meme and were bad game design in many ways, would have been something that at least at the beginning I would have been interested in trying, but I didn't play Warlords of Draenor. This is... What he is talking about here is that playing something that is new and good is opening his eyes to what MMOs should be about as a whole, not uniquely what Final Fantasy is or was about. He could take this very same mentality into any other game and have a fresh and fun experience waiting for him, even World of Warcraft.
If I want to be a ninja, a healer, a caster, a tank, anything I want at all, I don't have to re-level my character. I merely switch jobs, and that is amazing because all the things I've invested into my character in terms of its minions, its mounts, its glamour, or also known as transmogs, that follows me everywhere, even into a new job, or also known as classes in other MMOs. This off
Your transmog is account-wide. It follows you even into other characters in World of Warcraft. Like, I wish that I could find a way for him to just watch this back as a Final Fantasy player going into WoW for the first time. Because I do want to be excited that people are enjoying Final Fantasy. I just feel that we're getting credit for a lot of things that aren't necessarily actually what I feel Final Fantasy does unique.
Offers massive replayability, and while other MMOs might frown upon this approach, as they think it cuts short the amount of time you spend in the game by having you skip leveling other toons, and hence resulting in you consuming content quicker, and therefore spending less money on subscriptions, Square Enix basically looks at it differently and say, if I create something that users truly enjoy, they will stay and it will benefit us in the long run. Let's forgo the short-term monetary gains, let's focus on the long run. That, in a modern day AAA game development culture, is truly refreshing. I'd like to also touch upon one of the reasons why I've put off trying Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn for years. And that is because I tend to hear how A Realm Reborn's main scenarios are the more tedious ones compared to main story quests that you can find at the later expansions of Final Fantasy XIV. And having played through A Realm Reborn, I will say, A Realm Reborn was a true masterpiece. And while some people might say, hey, there are some very tedious quests, example Costa del Sol Banquet quest, I would say that really depends on how you're consuming the game. If you're just rushing to the endgame,
I think the reason to state that the story is tedious is you want to set expectations low. If somebody likes story, it's great. But if I say it's going to be the greatest story of all time and then it's anything but that, you let people down. So setting the expectations low doesn't damage anybody as long as you don't set them so low they choose not to play it because they hear it's awful. And so by setting it low, you do two things. You do not damage the people who are going to like the experience. They go, oh, wow, I really liked it. And you also tell people that it's okay if they don't like it. For people that don't like it, if we talk about nothing about how this game's a narrative masterpiece, they go, wow, something must be wrong with me or this isn't a game for me. And so by reaching out to that group of people first, we don't damage the first and we take care of the latter. And so I think by saying A Realm Reborn is the worst of the story, we don't have to necessarily say A Realm Reborn is a bad story. We don't have to necessarily say that you can't enjoy it. We simply say that, hey, if you enjoy A Realm Reborn, I have great news. And if not, I have great news.
Without stopping to smell the roses, just so that you can be with your friends at the endgame, I can see why someone might deem those quests as tedious. But if you're like me, and you find joy at every turn experiencing something new, be it to inspect the cute shark pet that someone has running alongside him, or be it sightseeing and taking screenshots of the sun rising behind a majestic landscape, or just listening to the beautifully crafted music by the musical geniuses on the development team, which has become the staple of Final Fantasy games now by the way, then I assure you, there is nothing boring about the quest. There's always something new to see. And when it finally gets to the end game of A Realm Reborn, when you have developed feelings for your character and the people around you, and you are encouraged by the beat of the epic and dramatic soundtracks in the background, you will understand that all the quests where you had to collect eggs, leaves, wine, food, deliver messages, they will all be worthwhile. Another reason why I've put off Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn was based on what I hear from others regarding the global cooldown, and how it was way slower than what I'm used to in World of Warcraft. And having played A Realm Reborn, I will admit, at the start, I had no off-GCD abilities and it felt weird, waiting for stuff to come back up to press. But as I started adding more and more off-GCD abilities to my hotbar,
That's why we put the disclosure in. It's not because it stays that way. It's because we need you to know that it's worth pushing through.
I reckon there's even a part of me that wished the GCD was longer, so I can properly weave in my off-GCD abilities between my on-GCD abilities. There is sudden...
Which when you go back and play the Burning Crusade, you are reminded that while the global cooldown isn't what bound me, a lot of times as a warrior, I'm leveling through the Burning Crusade as a warrior, I'm waiting on rage. And so effectively, combat is very slow as I wait on these slow and impactful moments in the rotation. And so as long as the rotation is impactful, telling people that the pacing might strike them as slow early on or might strike them as fast early on is just helping tell them, hey, what you're feeling is normal, what you're feeling is okay. Trust me, it gets better.
Suddenly a rhythm to the combat that I now comprehend with hindsight, and it is very enjoyable. Summing my thoughts up, I think back to when I first downloaded the free trial of Final Fantasy XIV A Realm Reborn, and how it was my intention for Final Fantasy XIV to kill time that I had on hand. Little did I imagine this MMO would evoke so many nostalgic memories of me sitting in front of my PlayStation 1 and 2 in front of the television as a kid and exploring all these amazing new zones and storylines and Final Fantasy titles that exist as a remote memory somewhere in my adult brain. It was as if playing World of Warcraft for 10 years, I've come to accept that MMOs are a grind, and the joy is only at the very end game after you are done with the grind. If I were to leave you with a single thought, A Realm Reborn and Final Fantasy XIV has taught me to embrace what I once knew as a kid, but I've forgotten as an adult, that it is about the journey, not the destination. And my journey in Eorzea will continue into future expansions, and I simply cannot wait. Thanks for watching this video, and if you liked it, do subscribe to the channel. It will mean a lot to me as a content creator, and a big thank you to my Patreon subscribers for supporting this channel. Adventures await my falafel and my watermelon kun, and I hope to see you in Eorzea.
I think it was well written. I think it was well scripted, and I think he very carefully phrased all the things as he experienced them as a new player. It is a reminder how starkly different it is to be new in something as opposed to a veteran, where you can sometimes come across as jaded. Some of the things he's saying are amazing. I'm a little concerned are going to be cracks in the armor that have a chance to bother him when they become jaded. Talking about the combat becoming better, Magneto mentions downsinking. The moment you start leveling up alts and you have to sink back down regularly to do your leveling roulette, it doesn't feel good. The moment you try to play especially a job that was added later, such as Dancer or Gunbreaker, and you try synced down content that those jobs were never designed to be played at, and they restrict the movements available anyways, it doesn't feel good. There are times in the game that things can be frustrating if you've been playing it over and over. Getting one dungeon per patch now, as we've restricted slowly the number of dungeons we get down to one, if that dungeon's not good or if it's not challenging and you're aware of how many weeks it will be until you get another one, only to find out that that one's not challenging, is a frustrating pattern to be emerged in, not a frustrating place to be as a new player. So a lot of times as a veteran, these warnings and all of that come from our point of view. I think that a lot of what he's describing here would be true if you go watch somebody like Sinkweaver go try World of Warcraft from being a Final Fantasy veteran. A lot of this is true just for being new. A lot of times when we're complaining about the current state of a battle system, the current state of a loot system, the current state of a content release, that really only impacts people who are fully caught up and have fully cleared the amount of backlog that they're currently interested in doing. It does not impact anybody that is working their way through the game for the first time, is going into their first expansion launch or their first patch launch, is going into content as they try to churn through backlog that they hear about that they missed as they got established in in-game. There is still plenty for them to get through. A lot of what we're talking about here is the current state for the people who are caught up. And so when I see these comparison videos, I think this one is a great summary of what a new player can expect to feel as they go through a Realm Reborn for the first time, in a way that I honestly couldn't write because I don't have this context. I didn't play through a Realm Reborn as my first experience as legacy content. I played through Realm Reborn when the name of the game was Final Fantasy XIV: A Realm Reborn. And so I have a different viewpoint. And so I appreciate him sharing it. I think that where a lot of my issue with it comes from is that it doesn't necessarily represent the completeness of kind of both his view and what will happen when even a future version of him has views on this game. I look forward to kind of checking back in on this series from time to time. Thank you so much, Quazii, for posting. Earned my subscription. And keep talking about gaming, kinda.